We are continuing to go over information on the age of exploration on Roman numeral 7. This outline right here is what you need to be referring to as we go through the PowerPoint in this video. So we are currently talking about Jamestown. We're going to wrap up Jamestown and move into other groups that were coming from England, because Jamestown is not the only colony that gets established by the English. It may be the first permanent one, but there will be other English settlers that come to the New World after the Jamestown settlers. So let's recap what we already know about Jamestown. We know it's the first permanent English settlement in America, established in 1607. We know that it was named after the current king of England at the time, which was James I. We know that it is located in Virginia, which was named after Elizabeth because she was before James, and she was the Virgin Queen. So she had never gotten married or had kids, and so they obviously wanted to honor her and named the actual land itself Virginia to honor her. We know that this colony is near the James River. It's in a mosquito-infested swamp, and so it is going to be on the verge of disaster. This colony almost did not make it. So we're going to go over the reasons for why this colony was on the verge of disaster. The colony of Jamestown grew very slowly in the beginning, and some of that has to do with the harsh conditions, the fact that they're in this mosquito-infested swamp, more about that in a minute, and the fact that there are hostile Native American Indian groups in the area. So these groups, they were not very friendly with the Jamestown settlers. Now, if you are in a new location, of course, you want to establish the necessities. You go into survival mode. So think about what you would need to survive. You need food and water. You need shelter. And unfortunately, one of the reasons this colony almost failed was because instead of building shelters and farming for food, they, being the Jamestown settlers, were too busy looking for gold. So they spent way too much time searching for gold, thinking, they're going to get rich very quickly. So it was very evident that many of these settlers almost starved to death. Some did. Okay, I'll give you those figures here in just a minute. Disease also went along with killing large numbers of these colonists, and already mentioned about hunger, starvation, so that was a reason for the deaths of so many of the colonists. And then again, the natives not being very friendly and very hostile. You would be too if someone was trying to invade your land. So those three factors, disease, hunger, starvation, battling with the natives, those ended up killing large numbers of colonists. We're talking 7 out of 10 people died of one of these three factors. Another reason the Jamestown colony almost failed was the fact that the men that made up the colony, they would be what we would refer to as gentlemen. These are men who had very good jobs back in England, and they are not used to this hard labor with their hands. They would be considered lazy because they were just kind of sitting around, not really doing anything. And unfortunately, that's not what this colony needed at the time. They needed people again, working on getting food and shelter and making sure that this colony was going to survive. So even though it doesn't look good for the people of Jamestown in the beginning stages, and they almost failed as a colony, there is going to be success. There are two things that will ultimately save Jamestown from absolute disaster. And those two things, one being a person, John Smith, talk more about him in a minute, and the other being the item, tobacco. So let me talk about how both of these will save this colony from disaster. First, John Smith. John Smith was one of the settlers at Jamestown. He didn't come initially, he came a little bit later. And when he arrived, he saw the chaos and the issues that were going on. So he actually decided to take on a leadership position. No one else was at the time. And he basically said, all right, everybody, here is the new rule. If you don't work, you don't eat. So everybody needs to get up and start doing something, because how's it been going for you so far? Not so good. So John Smith will definitely take charge of this colony and, get everybody doing something instead of just sitting around being lazy. So that's what we know about John Smith. He also was able to establish successful trade with some of the natives. And so because of that, these settlers learned how to plant corn, and they actually became woodsmen. So again, you can see all of the great things that John Smith was doing for the colony of Jamestown to help it survive. Now, the crop that saved Jamestown was tobacco. And I already mentioned that these men are considered gentlemen. They're not going to do the work of actually planting that tobacco. They had from England workers that we refer to as indentured servants. You'll learn a little bit more about them, I'm sure, in American history next year. So they work for a period of time, and in return, they have their trip paid for, their trip over here to the New World. Some were even promised land. And this was made up of men and women, these indentured servants. So they, of course, are helping to plant this tobacco crop. And you can see here that John Rolfe was given credit for taking that crop back to England in order to sell. That's why we refer to the tobacco crop as a cash crop, because the intentions are to obviously sell it to make money. Now, he also took the potato crop back to England, but that was not for cash purposes. That was more to, help feed people, because you know anything about the potato? You can grow a lot of them. It's very cheap, so you can feed a lot of people. So don't forget about John Rolfe's role with Jamestown and tobacco. Now, some of you are familiar with the Native American by the name of Pocahontas. We know that she ends up marrying John Rolfe. And when John Rolfe made the decision to go back to England, Pocahontas had to decide, was she going to go with him or stay? And she decided to go with him, even though I'm sure her family wasn't too happy about that. Unfortunately for Pocahontas, sometime while she was in England, they did have children together, but she'll eventually get some type of disease over in England and dies. So I knew some of you were familiar with her, and I wanted to go ahead and just bring it up. The people of Virginia decided that they wanted to live under a type of government where more people would be able to participate and help with decision making, instead of how they were currently living with just one person establishing all the rules, like John Smith was. Okay, so many people grew tired of that and they were ready for change. So what you see here is a group of people came together and created the first representative assembly. This is referred to as the House of Burgesses, and it was established in Virginia in 1619. The best way to describe this to you so that you would understand what the House of Burgesses is, it's similar to Congress, where you have people represented in this group who are responsible for helping to debate and create the laws. Now, we know that the big picture of the House of Burgesses is that it will prevent a dictatorship. Okay, like we said, a lot of people were tired of just one person telling everybody what to do. So the House of Burgesses being a representative assembly where together they make the decisions, that will prevent a dictatorship. So we are finished with the material about Jamestown and the people of Virginia, and we're moving on to your number 11 on your typed outline to go over another group of English settlers who came to the New World for a completely different reason than the people that settled Jamestown. Now remember, the whole reason for the Jamestown settlement was for money making. That London company took a chance and they will help fund that trip in order to make profits, okay, which in the end, we know that Jamestown will be ultimately successful. This next group of settlers are coming to the New World for a completely different reason. As you can see here, the English settlers are known as Pilgrims, and they are going to settle in the present-day Massachusetts at Plymouth. So they came over on board the Mayflower. Some of you might remember this from elementary school. More about that in a minute. And the reasons they left England was for religious freedom. They were tired of the King of England telling everyone that they must belong to the Church of England, which was also called the Anglican Church, which happened to be Protestant. Now, you have to understand that a lot of these people had been Catholic, and now the King of England is saying, okay, we're going to follow the Protestant faith, and not everybody was happy about that. Well, at this time, you don't go against the king. So to keep these people safe and to allow them to do what they want, they chose to leave, hoping that they could come and establish their own church with their own beliefs. So you can see here that the Pilgrims want to separate entirely from the Church of England, better known as the Anglican Church. That's why they're called separatists. They want to separate from the Church of England and basically form their own church and establish, what they believe. The Pilgrims were definitely more organized than the settlers at Jamestown, because as you can see here, on their way over to the New World on their Mayflower ship, they wanted to make sure that there was organization and unity before they even arrived. So the men on board of this ship decided to come up with what's called the Mayflower Compact, and this is on your 11 little a. So this agreement made by the men on the Mayflower ship is for self-government and setting their own laws. So again, they want to make it clear to everyone that they're all going to work together. They're not going to have a dictatorship with one person in charge. They are working together to self-govern and make their own laws. I'm going to go ahead and end this video so that I can get ready for the next one and go over information about Miles Standish and how this colony of Plymouth had some struggles in the beginning as well. So more about that on the next video.